This is Whisper from history, where forgotten voices rise again. In the darkness of the 19th century, a boy was born, Louis Braille. He lost his own light, yet became the new light for the world. This is the story of a man who was blind himself, yet gave millions the power to read, to write, and to feel music in a way never imagined before. Stay with us until the end, to witness how one blind man illuminated the entire world. In the early years of the 19th century, in a small village outside Paris, a child was born into a world of silence and darkness. His name was Louis Braille. He could neither see nor hear, and for years his family kept him hidden, believing he would never live a life beyond their modest farm. Yet history, often written in unlikely corners, would find him. Louis's story is one of shadows and light, of barriers broken, and of how a boy who lived without sight or sound left behind something that reshaped music itself. To understand how modern music notation came into being, and how we today can read and play it with such ease, we must return to a time when the language of music was locked away from those who could not see. France, in the early 1800s, was a nation that prided itself on culture, philosophy, and art. Yet its compassion for those with disabilities was minimal. Children born blind were often abandoned, shut away in institutions, or left to survive in silence. The few schools that existed for the blind were little more than asylums. Books for blind students did not exist. The education of the blind was considered impossible, even dangerous. To be born blind was to live in darkness, both physical and intellectual. And then came Louis Braille, a boy from Couvray, France, who lost his sight at the age of 3 after an accident in his father's workshop. By the time he was 10, Braille was sent to the Royal Institute for Blind Youth in Paris, one of the few places in Europe where blind children could attempt to learn. There, he discovered how little the world had done for people like him. The students were forced to trace raised letters of the alphabet with their fingers, each page massive and cumbersome, with almost no practical use. To read even a few sentences required hours of effort. Books were scarce, expensive, and utterly impractical. The young Braille dreamed of something more, something that would allow the blind not only to read words, but to unlock the richness of knowledge, mathematics, and above all, music. Music was central to life at the Royal Institute. The students were trained as musicians, since music was one of the only professions available to the blind in 19th century France. But here, too, the limitations were crushing. Music notation was written on staff paper with inclines, notes, rests, and clefs, all visual symbols. For blind musicians, memorization was the only option. Teachers played a phrase on the piano, and the student repeated it until the entire piece was learned. A symphony required months of memorization, and the smallest mistake could destroy the performance. Blind musicians could never truly study the score themselves. They were locked out of music's written world. Braille's breakthrough came from an unlikely source, the French military. In 1821, a soldier named Charles Barbier visited the Royal Institute to demonstrate a system of night writing. He had invented so soldiers could read messages in the dark without giving away their position with lanterns. Barbier's system used a grid of raised dots, arranged in patterns that could be felt with the fingertips. It was bulky, and the military had rejected it as too complicated. But when the young Louis Braille touched those dots, he felt possibility. Here was a code that did not rely on the eye, but on the sensitivity of the fingertip. For the first time, language might be made accessible through touch. At just 12 years old, Braille began to experiment. He spent years refining Barbier's idea, reducing the size of the grid, eliminating unnecessary complexity, and creating a system built on 6 dots arranged in 2 columns of 3. The simplicity was genius. Each configuration of dots represented a letter, number, or punctuation mark. with only 6 dots, arranged in endless combinations. Every sound, every word, every concept could be recorded. And yet, for Braille, the alphabet was only the beginning. His true passion was music. He understood that music notation had to be more than a copy of the visual score. It had to be a system that blind musicians could learn as naturally as the sighted read sheet music. He devised symbols for notes, rhythms, rests, and dynamics, all represented in the 6-dot system. He aligned them with the staff, beat, and measure, creating a notation that allowed blind musicians to read with their fingers as efficiently as sighted. Musicians read with their eyes. For the first time in history, a blind student could open a book of music, trace the dots with his hands, and play a symphony without ever hearing it first. The invention was revolutionary. It gave blind people access not only to literature, but to the universal language of music. Yet at the time, few recognized its genius. The Royal Institute resisted the system, preferring the old methods. Teachers argued it was too complex, too radical. Louis Braille, who had given the world the gift of literacy through touch, died at the age of 43, largely unrecognized, his body weakened by tuberculosis. But his code did not die with him. His students carried it forward. Slowly, school by school, country by country, the system spread, and at its heart was not only the alphabet, but the music notation that transformed the lives of blind musicians. In the decades that followed, the Braille music system became the backbone of blind education. Blind pianists, organists, and composers could now study Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart without relying on the memory of a teacher. They could analyze scores, compare interpretations, and compose their own music. The blind were no longer condemned to be imitators. They could now be scholars, performers, and creators in their own right. By the late 19th century, Braille music had spread across Europe and into the United States. It opened doors for generations of musicians who might otherwise have lived in silence. Consider the story of Fanny Crosby, the American hymn writer who lost her sight as an infant in 1820. Without Braille notation, she might have remained confined to oral tradition. Instead, she became one of the most prolific songwriters in history, composing more than 8,000 hymns. Her work inspired congregations across America, giving voice to faith and hope. Or take the example of Helen Keller, who, though primarily remembered for her mastery of language, found deep solace in music through Braille notation, which allowed her to follow rhythms and lyrics with her fingers. The system born from a young boy's dream in France rippled across oceans, transforming not only education, but the very culture of music. The impact of Braille's music system is still felt today. Every major work of classical and modern music is available in Braille. Blind musicians across the world, from conservatories in New York to schools in Tokyo, rely on it daily. Technology has adapted it, with digital Braille displays and software that converts sheet music into tactile dots. But the foundation remains unchanged. The 6-dot code that Louis Braille perfected nearly 2 centuries ago remains one of the most enduring inventions of the modern age. And yet, what makes this story so profoundly human is not only the brilliance of the invention, but the context in which it was created. Louis Braille was not a scientist with laboratories at his disposal, nor a wealthy patron with resources. He was a child in darkness, armed only with determination and a desperate need for independence. His invention was born not out of theory, but out of necessity. He wanted to read, to learn, to play the organ in his village church without depending on others. His quest for dignity became a revolution for millions. To understand the emotional weight of this history, imagine for a moment the silence of a blind musician before Braille. A piano stands before him. His fingers know the keys, his ears recognize melodies, but the vast universe of written music is locked away. He cannot see the notes on the staff, cannot read the dynamics, cannot know the intentions of a composer centuries before. His world is limited to what others are willing to teach. Now imagine that same musician touching a page of Braille music for the first time. The dots rise beneath his fingertips. A measure unfolds, quarter note, half note, rest. A melody emerges, not from memory, but from his own reading. For the first time, he is free. He is no longer an imitator, he is an interpreter. This is the gift Louis Braille gave. It was not merely literacy, not merely music, but independence, creativity, and dignity. He gave the blind the ability to take part in humanity's shared conversation, to write themselves into history, rather than remain its silent observers. And he did so quietly, humbly, without recognition in his own lifetime. Today, when we think of music, we often think of sound, the swell of a symphony, the voice of a singer, the rhythm of a drum. But behind every performance lies notation, the written language of music. For sighted musicians, it is ink on paper. For blind musicians, it is dots beneath the fingertips. Both systems carry the same notes, the same rhythms, the same beauty. Both make possible the miracle of human expression. And both remind us that genius does not always come from the brightest lights of society. Sometimes it emerges from the margins, from a child once thought incapable of learning, who instead gave the world a new way to see without sight. The story of the blind boy who invented modern music notation is not one of pity, but of triumph. Louis Braille's invention reshaped education, music, and communication for millions. It is a testament to resilience, to the human need for expression, and to the belief that no barrier, not even blindness, can extinguish the desire to create. It is also a reminder to us all that history is not only written in books, but in the lives of those who dared to imagine something different, something better, and left behind a legacy that continues to sing across generations. Louis Braille showed the world that even weakness can be turned into strength to transform humanity. True light does not come from the eyes, but from the heart and the mind. The silence that once trapped him has today become the sound of music, and it reminds us that humanity's greatest power is hope and determination. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and explore our new playlist, Forgotten Geniuses and Visionaries.